For USCFootball.com, I'm Jack Smith, joined by Connor Morrissette for instant analysis for USC's Wednesday practice as we wind down fall camp and approach the first game of the season against LSU. Connor, this feels right. It's good to be back. Thank you for carrying the torch with Chris throughout the fall camp when I had to be gone.
Hey, great to see you, Jack. It's fun to have you back in the action, and yeah, you'll be the instant analysis host from here on out. So I'm now the co-host. Happy to do it. I had fun hosting, but you're back where you belong as the host. Good to see you, man.
Ryan asked on the podcast the other day if we've ever done this together before. It feels like we did about 40 of them last year, so we've got the battle testing that USC's defense wants to have as they try and build the chemistry together.
How quickly Ryan forgets. Ryan, if you're watching this on your vacation in Montana, we're back. We've done a million of these, like Jack said, not new. We're back for Season 2.
So I heard you guys didn't get to see a whole ton of practice yesterday, but we did get to view a good amount of it today. Saw stretching, walked around the new turf field, which is my first time seeing it, and got to see a bunch of different parts of practice. Connor, why don't you start? What were your practice observations?
Well, during some of the individual work, we got to see the defensive backs split into their specific position groups, and Jaylen Smith continues to be with the cornerbacks, which I think is interesting. I said a few weeks ago I feel like he might be the odd man out, and now as time has gone on, I could see him potentially starting at one of the boundary corner spots, so that's certainly something to pay attention to. The linebackers were working with Matt Entz on a drill where they shuffled on the line or one of the yard lines, and Entz yelled at one of the players, "Stay on the line," like he does in that linebacker voice. And talking to Eric Gentry afterward, he said, Matt Entz has been everything that I could have asked for in a coach. We'll have a little bit more on that later on. It's always just really fun, Jack, to watch Matt Entz, a guy who's been a head coach at the college level, of course, at North Dakota State, and seeing him work with a specific position group, that's been really cool, even though it's only for a few minutes here and there. And then we went over to the defensive and offensive line areas, and when the offensive line was working, it was no surprise. It's Jonah Monheim at center, and then the left guard, Emmanuel Pregnon, left tackle, Elijah Page. On the right side, it's Alani Noah. We're continuing to see him get those first-team reps, and then Mason Murphy at right tackle. If I was a betting man, I'd say that's going to be the starting offensive line against LSU. Probably not totally set in stone right now. It just looks like it's trending that way, though, and at this point I'd be surprised if that wasn't what they went with against the Tigers.
Not sure you'll find lines for the offensive line in Vegas, yes, but we will be there in a couple of weeks. I think the coaching energy is something that I noticed for my first practice back that's probably one of the bigger differences, and we got to talk to guys after practice, and a couple of them on the defensive side did bring up the difference between last year compared to this year. One of them was Eric Gentry, who, and I feel like that's what he talked mostly about. He praised the coaching staff, and he had a lot of words for the comparison between this year and last season.
Yeah, he didn't give long answers, but he gave very truthful responses. So he said he's just having a lot more fun than he was last year. That's something that we heard Mason Cobb say as well at the USC Media Day before fall camp got started. And he didn't really mean to, and he kind of went out of his way to talk about how he didn't mean any slight against the previous staff, but it's tough to read it any differently. Gentry, like I said, he's having more fun. He said Entz is everything he could have possibly asked for in a linebacker coach, so he wants to be giving Entz his all, the way Entz is giving all that he has to Gentry. So I thought that was really unique and an interesting perspective. And Eric Gentry talked about how he's healthy now during fall camp, and last season he wasn't, so that's been an adjustment, and or a good adjustment, I should say, and that's been better for him. He just seems in a much better place. I don't know if USC likes how truthful he was with us. I definitely recommend checking out that interview. He had a lot of really unique things to say, a lot of interesting things to say. But the defense, Lincoln Riley said it yesterday, just the overall vibe of the defense, it's better. Eric Gentry said the teaching, the coaching that he's getting is better. Will that translate on Saturdays? It has to, for us to really feel that way definitively, but you have to be feeling good about where the defense is at right now if you're a USC fan, just based on what we're hearing, because these coaches, they're doing a much better job, it sounds like, than last season. We'll see how it looks against LSU, but like I said, tough to not feel better about it right now.
Yeah, we heard a couple more things from Eric Gentry. He was asked what he's learned so much throughout this fall camp, and he said how to play football, and he kind of laughed at the answer. I'm not exactly sure how I took it. I think fans will take it the way that they take it when they hear it, but that's one of the things that he brought up. And he also said he's having a ton more fun this year, and he says he thinks this group feels tighter, and that's kind of the sentiment that came after the Holiday Bowl last year, is the people that were around then were the guys that wanted to be around still, and that's one of the reasons they felt like they were able to have success against Louisville. And it does feel like this group still echoes that sentiment a year, a half of a year later, is that this group is tighter, and so they're able to have more fun than last season.
That's been a big off-season talking point as well, the cohesion, everyone being on the same page. I think it was Jamil Muhammad a couple weeks ago, he was asked about cohesion, and he said last year the offense They were kind of just the offense, and the defense, it was just kind of the defense. We're a lot more connected this year. He then went on to say everyone was connected, but it just felt different this season where those guys who are on one side of the ball, they get to know the other side of the ball a lot better, and I think that's been a big emphasis with Riley too. We heard Miller Moss in the offseason talk about how some of the wide receivers, they could have been a little selfish here and there at times last season, and not everyone was on the same page. The vibe that I get with the receiver room this year is much different. Again, we'll see what happens once the ball gets snapped and reps are given and reps aren't given to certain players. That, of course, will affect chemistry, but I do think the team, from a cohesion sense, is in a much better spot than it was a year ago. Things are trending in the right direction, and I don't anticipate them losing 5 games at the end of the season like last year, but hey, we'll see what happens.
It seems like they're go-karting together as well. Jaylen Smith and Keely Arnold both mentioned that today. What were your takeaways from what those two had to say?
It was great to hear from Jaylen Smith because he battled an injury and now he's fully healthy. Haven't heard a ton from him. Again, my gut is telling me that he's going to be playing cornerback, so I tried to get some stuff from him about playing corner. I asked him what he's done specifically at cornerback and how he felt like he's progressed this camp, and he said just little by little every day. It's been fun working with D'Anton Lynn and Doug Belk. He also talked about how he played a lot of corner in high school, and then when he got older, he switched to nickel, and at USC he pretty much exclusively played at nickel last year, and now he's learning the whole defense. So I'm pigeonholing him in at cornerback. It's possible he could still play nickel. It's possible he could even play some safety like he did in the Holiday Bowl. He said that's been a lot more fun too, and playing different positions helps him learn maybe one thing that he didn't know at one spot. He can apply that to somewhere else. Again, my gut's telling me he's going to be a cornerback. They're being really coy about it. I asked Doug Belk earlier in camp where Jaylen Smith's best position is. He said all of them. He's the only guy in the defense who can play all 5 spots. So again, this is all to be determined, but it looks to me right now like he might be a cornerback for USC. He's been repping there a lot, and I'm excited to see what that looks like because I still think his potential is really high, Jack, and he's a guy who was one of the bright spots on defense last year. He's really young for his age. He's someone I think has NFL potential if this year goes really well. A really fun player to watch for USC. If you're looking for a reason to be excited about the defense, I'd start with Jaylen Smith.
And I talked to John Humphrey, one of the UCLA corner transfers, and when he was asked about which other DBs have stood out to him, the first name that popped out of his mouth was Jaylen Smith. Now, he went on to say about everybody else in the secondary, but that was the first kind of knee-jerk reaction to that question is I need to spit out the name Jaylen Smith. And we did get to talk to John Humphrey and Kamari Ramsey today, 2 UCLA transfers. They've both been in this D'Anton Lynn defense. What did you take away from those two today?
Hearing Kamari, it was interesting. I asked him at this point of fall camp last year, what's the difference from where he was at UCLA to now, and he brought up D'Anton Lynn, how he feels like Lynn is a lot more comfortable in year 2 as the defensive coordinator, because people forget UCLA had that great turnaround last year. That was his first year calling plays, first year as a defensive coordinator, and it was a booming success. That's why he's here at USC. So he's still going through some growing pains, even though last year was so great for him, and that really stood out to me. The fact that last year was so new, and he feels like Lynn is getting better, that really gets me excited if I'm a USC fan. What, potentially a better defense than UCLA? That's how I took it a little bit. Maybe I'm reading into that too much because Lynn, it just seems like he's adjusting more to being a defensive coordinator than he was in that first year. And then Ramsey also talked about how he hopes to make it to the next level, and he's talked about this all offseason, the NFL pedigree of Lynn. It's why he followed him to USC. It's why he's so excited about playing for him. And then he spoke like some football jargon that I didn't even understand, some deep like defensive back talk that went way over my head, but he was explaining how that's what he's going to hear at the NFL level. He's hearing it now, and he's really excited about playing for Lynn in this scheme. I'm very high on the secondary, Jack. I think that group, the safeties, Kamari Ramsey, Keely Arnold, whoever ends up playing at cornerback, I think is going to be great. Greedy Vance, I really like him at nickel. He was a standout at Florida State last season. He was behind a couple NFL draft guys. When he did get in, he looked really good. So I think you have a chance to really have a good season there in the secondary. As I've said on every podcast, and people are probably sick of me hearing it, it all depends on what the defensive line does. That, to me, sort of determines the ceiling of the defense, and then the offensive line on the other side, I think that determines the ceiling of the offense. If you can get representative play in the trenches, there's a lot of talent everywhere else, and Kamari Ramsey is a big part of that.
Seems like from all the defenders we talked to today, they think D'Anton Lynn brings a blend of that NFL pedigree, but also making it in a simple form, a scheme that's easy to understand.
Yeah, Gentry talked about that too.
Players aren't getting confused. Pre-snap, they're able to do less in their mind and do more with their bodies when the play actually starts. And that's a tough balance to strike. And I know it would have been good to ask D'Anton Lynn about that today. He was not available at the end of practice. He slipped out, wasn't able to make the media appearance. But that is, it's seeming like one of his strong suits is being able to bring that NFL background, help guys get to the pros and do things the way that they do in the pros while making it digestible for all these college athletes.
You nailed it, and that's been a big talking point of the offseason. What was so difficult about last year? Guys not being on the same page, guys looking at their wristband before the snap, guys really not knowing the play call in time. And remember Christian Roland Wallace waving his hands, and it just didn't look very good. Like everyone was on the same page, and there was a lot of confusion. So simplifying everything. I think someone told me earlier this offseason they have like 8 base plays, and they do a bunch of different things off of those 8 plays. But as long as you have those 8 down, you really should know what to do. And so I think there's less thinking before the snap. There is that NFL style of coaching, what you're going to see at the next level, that really gets people excited. And all Lincoln Riley wanted when he hired this new defensive staff was to get the best teachers possible, the best developers possible. And hearing Gentry talk about Matt Entz sounds like a real developer. And hearing Danton Lynn, just what the guys have said about him, not only a great developer, but a great teacher as well. That was the talk of the offseason. And again, we don't see a lot, but based on what people are saying, players, other coaches, the teaching has been very good. And against LSU, if USC can stop the run, I think they'll have a great chance.
Any other takeaways from today?
I think overall, I was disappointed that we didn't get Lynn, because I wanted to ask him, with this defensive line on USC this year, what similarities does he see to the defensive line that he had last year at LSU or at UCLA? There we go, the third school in my head. What similarities were there? What differences were there? So that was disappointing to not talk to him about that. But no, I heard from Gentry and Jaylen Smith and Kamari Ramsey. Those were the guys who I spoke to post-practice. Marquise Gallegos is on the scout team. That was something I wanted to shout out. And then I thought it was cool, Chris mentioned this in his ghost notes, the great LSU linebacker Harold Perkins on the scout team for USC. Garrison Madden is playing as Perkins, and that's a tough shoes to fill. So we'll see how well he does preparing USC for that 5-star linebacker that LSU has, who everyone's anticipating taking a big jump. He was a guy who played a little bit on the edge his first year, transitioned to linebacker last season, didn't go perfectly a year ago, but now they have a new defensive coordinator, and people are really high on him. So Garrison Madden, he might not play a lot on Saturdays, but he's doing his part as a scout team player.
And we probably won't hear from Danton Lynn till next week, which, crazy enough, it's already game week next week. We get Lincoln Riley tomorrow for a Zoom, so make sure you're staying tuned on USCfootball.com. I'm sure we'll be tweeting stuff out as Lincoln Riley talks. But, Connor, thank you for the time, and that'll do it for us here on Instant Analysis.